Today, we have the opportunity to listen also to the professor from Monash University, Nikolai Veresov. Nikolai came to Australia some years ago and is part of the team of the Professor Marilyn Fleur that we made an interview a little before. Professor Veresov is Russian, and he had a long experience as academic experience. First, he finished one doctoral degree in Russia. He's a very recognized specialist in cultural historical theory. The second PhD he made in Finland, where he was a professor also from the university. And finally, at the end, he is at this moment in Monash. Professor Veresov has a publication in 10 different languages, and one of his books, very recognizing and getting by the academic community, is the Undiscovered Vygotsky. Professor Veresov, please feel comfortable with us here. I expect that you are feeling well here in Brasília and in the institution with us. And I will ask you to talk about your history of work and your current interest within the cultural historical approach.
Yeah, first of all, I would like to express my deepest gratitude to Professor Fernando González Rey and to University of Brasília and University Center of Brasília for giving us the opportunity to come here, to stay here in Brasília for 2 weeks, which are, well, the most exciting weeks in my life because of new culture. It's my first visit to Brasília, to Latin America, and while despite a lot of differences, cultural differences, I still have a strong feeling that we have a lot of commonalities between Russian culture and Brazilian culture, because there's a culture of openness, the culture of emotionality, and a culture of talking to each other, addressing each other. So, I should say that I feel as I'm at home here. Mm-hmm. So, and thank you for everything, for this preparation work you did, because I know how hard it is to prepare for visit for 2 weeks and to make the program and to organize everything, transportation, hotel, and so I feel very welcome here, and
I'm very happy.
I would like to just share my feelings now, and thank you very much for inviting me.
You're welcome.
Well, as for my trajectory, well.
And your present work, you feel comfortable.
Okay, so just one word about my trajectory, because I started my academic career being a kindergarten teacher. I started my work in early childhood education as a kindergarten teacher. So it was many, many years ago. But now I'm an associate professor in Monash, a member of our international team. So you see the starting point, you see the present point, and you see that I had to change my country from Russia to Finland, then from Finland to Australia, and now I feel myself a kind of international researcher, and being a part of the international research team in Monash really makes me happy. This is very, very briefly. But as for my interest, is for what I'm doing, well, I always have a challenge because I'm doing a lot of theoretical work. But sometimes it's difficult to explain your theoretical work, because theoretical work needs a kind of certain level of abstractions. Mm-hmm. For example, it's quite hard to explain to people who are not familiar to physics the quantum mechanics.
Of course.
Quantum mechanics is quite a complex and very abstract system of laws and concepts. But if you look on the developing child is much, much more difficult subject and object to study than the elemental particle. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, and therefore, I prefer to explain what I'm doing, I prefer to use metaphors. Mm-hmm. Because the metaphors can help the audience and even to yourself to explain what you are really doing, not using strong, high-level scientific terminology, but just describing a picture, the metaphoric picture, which helps to understand, which can create some kind of image which will help to understand strong or high or deep theoretical issues. If you allow me, Fernando,
yes, please,
to start with the...
Please, but I only want to remind you that it is very important in the university, higher education, to develop the qualities of abstraction, because one of the critical points we have in general, through the positivistic tradition, is the simplification centered on the facts. Then theoretical questions are very welcome also here, but you feel comfortable.
Well, I promise that my metaphors will be not as
Okay,
the first metaphor is that, well, the first question is, why theory? Why we as educators, why we as families, communities, doing our educational practices as parents, as teachers, as early childhood educators, as a policymakers in a area of social and education. Why we need a theory? What is this theory? For what reason? So my answer to this is my first metaphor. This is a metaphor of iceberg. Iceberg. So sometimes we look on the it looks like a mountain, ice mountain. And we can look on this ice mountain and say, oh, the huge ice mountain. We can analyze this mountain. We can make an observation of this mountain. We can do what we want to do with this mountain. But if you have a theory, theory helps you to understand that this is not an ice mountain. It's just a small tip of the iceberg which is hidden under the water. And if you use the theory, theory gives you a kind of glasses which help you to see the whole iceberg instead of top of the iceberg. But if we educators really want to understand what we are doing, what is the reality, what is the complexity of the child, so we need a theory, because this is the only way which gives you a possibility to see the complexity. But iceberg is iceberg. Iceberg is something which doesn't change. But the child, developing child, is an iceberg which has a lot of changing, because the child development never stops, and even adult development never stops. So, and theory helps you to capture the whole complexity of the developmental processes, which are only sending some changes on the on the surface, but instead of observing these changes on the surface, theory gives you the possibility to understand why these superficial changes happen. What are the hidden geological processes which bring this into life? This is my understanding of the theory, and why we need a theory. If our task is to understand the child in his or her development, not as a result, but as a process, we need a theory. Okay, so this is a strong tool for our understanding of the reality we are working with, and our reality is developing child in family and in community.
And in which extent the cultural historical approach has contributed to your vision of theory, and what the implication it has in your current work at this moment?
This is very interesting, and for this, well, forgive me, for this I have another metaphor which will help to show why cultural historical theory. Not because there are, if you look on the academia, you see a huge variety of different theories of child development, from Piaget, maturational theories, social behaviorist theories, Bronfenbrenner ecological theories, all the big variety of the theoretical approaches. So, and again, you need a kind of metaphor to understand what makes cultural historical theory unique comparing to other theories. So my metaphor is a metaphor of an apple on the tree, the fruit on the tree. Okay, so imagine the fruit on the tree, and well, we can analyze this fruit using different theoretical tools. For example, we can describe how fruit looks. Is it is apple red or green or yellow? How it tastes? What is the taste of this fruit? Is it big or small? There is a huge number of theories who are describing the configuration. So the image of the fruit. So we call them empirical theories because they are mostly dealing with the images, with the how it looks. Okay. So if your task is to analyze this particular fruit, you can use this theory as an analytical tool. Okay. But if you want to understand the fruit, you have to keep in mind that fruit is the result of the process. First it was flower, then it changed into the bud, and then to the fruit.
And the seed.
Yeah, and if you want to understand what really the fruit is, you have to reconstruct the whole process, because this is the result of the process. For this we have another theories, the theories which are focused on the stages and milestones. Piagetian theories, all these. So they describe the changes, the milestones, the transformations of the fruit. So, and what is good in these theories? They are describing the process. They are describing the process.
And never has a fruit as a result. Yeah. The fruit is always in process.
Yeah. So it's good. But again, it's only one aspect. So I was thinking about how can I find a theory which can describe the whole process, because even the transformation of the flower into the bud into the fruit cannot be separated from the whole tree, because it's a whole tree, and the roots of the tree, and the stem, and the branches, and the leaves, and sun shining. So the whole system, the whole big system which really generates this particular apple as a result. And I see that cultural historical theory is the only one theory which takes into account the whole complexity, not describing the fruit, not describing the process of the changing of the fruit, but not describing even the tree. Describes the tree, roots, land, sun, and all these big complex of. It's a system which really affects the apple. Therefore, apple might look differently because different location of the tree, different amount of sun coming, water, roots. So, and if you use this metaphor, for me, the child should be understood only in a big picture, including biological factors, but most of all, social, surrounding, social and cultural environment in which the child grows, because this is the tree which has roots. So this is my analogy.
Professor Nikolai, but it will be very interesting for me, for example, how you can insert the historical process within this complexity of social cultural processes within which the child is in the present moment. What is your view? How can you make explicit the historical in this relation?
Historical?
Yes, the historical, the history of the child, how is updated in the present moment of his life as unity. Because remember, cultural historical approach.
That's I wanted
precisely I want that our listener can understand how history is taken into consideration.
It's a very interesting question and a very deep question, by the way. So, and as any deep question, it has no simple answer.
Yes, of course.
Okay? But thank you for your hint you just made for me that why cultural historical theory.
Yes.
It's not because it's historical. It was in the history.
So
this theory we call it cultural because this theory helps us to understand that the child mental development is shaped by culture where the child lives. Therefore, in different cultural environments, the children's individual developmental trajectories are different because of different cultural environments. So these are like a kind of environments, different conditions for the tree to grow, and therefore, but on the other hand, it's cultural historical theory because in two meanings, in two senses. First, every child has his or her individual history of development. Okay. the story, which is, of course, connected with the cultural background, family,
of course,
personality, subjectivity. So, but what I like in cultural historical theory, that it says that every child not only has his or her history, the child actively creates his or her individual history of life. The child is not a passive receiver of the stimulus coming from outside and reacts like a stimulus response to logic. No, child is actively participating in his micro-social situation. So, and cultural historical theory emphasizes the active role of the child in growing within the context. And there is a special concept for this, the concept called social situation of development.
But as you know, many authors in social, cultural, historical activity background did not recognize exactly that this active character that you are emphasizing.
Yeah, and I'm happy to hear here, because we are having ongoing seminar with Fernando days and nights. What I like to think about together is that how Fernando's conception of subjectivity or theory of subjectivity can contribute, can develop this understanding of the child as an active participant, the active producer of his or her using emotions, imagination, creativity, and all these things, being an active component of the social situation of development. Because Vygotsky said that social situation of development is not the environment, is a system of relations between the child and the environment. So, which means system of relations. The child is not less active, and therefore the co-construction of the child's individual history through reconstructing of his subjectivity might be the very good theoretical tool we can use to analyze the contradictory and dramatical process of development of the child. So, and in this respect, one of the important concepts of Vygotsky, which is the concept of переживание, has a very great importance.
Yes, I follow.
Yeah,
follow
because look, it should be recognized that Vygotsky did a very strong theoretical, methodological, epistemological gap from the principle of reflection
This is a very important point.
to the principle of refraction. So he says that child not only reflects the impulses which are coming from outside, never mind physical, emotional, social, but child actively refracts all these environmental impacts. But this refraction is, the child is working out, he generates his or her answer, response to this by creating something new, by building, by producing, producing something which can be a result of this refraction. So, and this changed the whole logic of understanding of psychology. Because psychology, which is based on the principle of Descartes' stimulus response, is fantastic, and we have no questions. But psychology, which takes the principle of refraction as a basis, have more possibilities to provide us theoretical tools to explain the active role of the child, our subjectivity as a principle of psychology, because psychology is the science of subjects, not the science of objects like elementary particles. Therefore, coming back to my metaphor, developing child who is actively participates, produces something in actions and mentally because of imagination. Because what is imagination? Creation of the image.
Yes.
The child should construct, should create the image as a target, as a goal. So these are theoretical questions I'm now working on. They might look borrowing for some people, but I think this is very important to develop these concepts who remain undeveloped in Vygotsky's theory. And at the same time, my second task as a researcher, as a associate professor in Monash is just to show, to unpack to the new generation of my colleagues, students, PhD students, the richness, the real richness and power of cultural historical theory as a complex, as a system of tools we can use for research, for analysis, and as educators for creating our own unique individual educational practices as parents, as educators, as policymakers, as even school leaders. So because well, research is a research, but every research should have a practical outcome.
It is a very important point. And I guess that one point in which we are close, both teams, you there, Professor Mary, you, Nikolai, and me here, is precisely in emphasizing this active role of the person, of the child, of the, you know, because it is not only the determination of the external condition on the child, and there is a point that unfortunately have not developed enough in the cultural historical tradition. For this reason, it is very important to focus on this. And what do you have to say as professor in relation to the way students deal with the cultural historical approach? Maybe it's my last question, because we are in time, and at the end I will give you the opportunity to say some general conclusion, general comments.
Thank you, Fernando, for this is a fantastic question, because, well, very often I can see from the faces in the audience that, okay, that is very interesting, Professor Nikolai, but we are practical people. we have our diploma, we go to the field. So as teachers, as educators, as early childhood educators, how these strong theoretical metaphors or whatsoever can help me to be a good teacher? So what is the, well, and my answer would be, okay, well, I take only one aspect, if you allow me. So I think this one aspect is the most important one. Well, according to cultural historical theory principles, so the social, it does not only create the conditions for development, but social is the source of development of the child. The source. I always use the metaphor of a car. Imagine a car have two pedals, gas and brake. You can use this as a factors and the wheel, and you can then understand how the car moves. But if you want to understand why the car moves, you have to look on the engine, because engine makes the car moving.
It's
okay,
this is a good metaphor.
So, and if you are a driver, and if your understanding is that you have only pedals and a wheel, so probably you're not a good driver, because when something happens, you have no understanding. So I wanted our teachers to be good drivers, in the sense that they understand that the active role of the teacher is not the person who is just giving some knowledge and controlling kids.
A simple mediator. It's not a simple
It's not
mediator.
even a mediator. The point is that teacher is or parent,
of course,
is the person who creates this set of situations socially by interacting with the child, which can be a starting point for developmental processes. So what teacher is actually doing, the teacher is specially generating the developmental conditions for the child. We are not sitting and waiting. When the child is developed enough to understand us, okay? So is the child ready to be taught on this level? No. Knowledge of cultural historical theory helps me, an educator, to reposition myself not as a teacher, as a knowledge transmitter to the person who in my classroom, in family, whatsoever, is able to create developmental situations, not only learning situations, but which helps the child develop his memory, thinking, emotions, and so on. So it puts me on the position of the real educator in the full sense of the word, because we educators are responsible not only for child's knowledge, literacy, numeracy. It's our responsibility to provide, to create the developmental conditions for every child to develop their minds. So we are active participants of development. We are not passive observers. We are active participants. And this is important, because this is the only theory which helps to reposition ourselves as active participants of social relations.
Unfortunately, we don't have more time. But anyway, I want that in very short phrases you summarize one question. Yes, the creation of the conditions are really important, but the conditions are more dialogical one than objective ones.
Yeah, sure.
And even being dialogical, the sense that the conditions are for each student, make different kinds of position. The students generate over this. For example, I like so much that you refer to social condition as source. Yes, the word source implies that each of us within the source will take different paths. And it is for me a crucial point for the theoretical discussion of in this moment in cultural historical
absolutely agree.
What is your final conclusion?
Well, my final conclusion is that I absolutely agree with what you said, and I see cultural historical theory as first as a strong theoretical tool for research. Second, I see it as a part of methodological new ways of doing experimental work with kids. And third, I see it as a very strong tool which help the educators, parents, educators, policymakers, school leaders and principals to get better understanding of we are responsible not only for these formal academic results of the child. It's our task, it's our job to provide the most efficient conditions for these tree to grow and for this apple to appear. So that might be, again, back to my metaphor.
Thank you very much for your contribution.
Thank you.
And really your presence and the presence of Professor Melly in these days has greatly contributed to our institution. And I expect that will and very polemic material for our students. Really, thank you very much.